My name is Marina Cole, 32 years old. The ranch smelled like hay and caramel apples, sunlight slanting through the open barn doors in warm, lazy bands. String lights hummed above long wooden tables, linen napkins folded like little flags of propriety. Laughter floated through the air with the scent of cider and smoke from the grills. Every face at those tables knew how to look comfortable on command. They knew how to pose for a life that, from the outside, read like a neat, glossy caption: family, together, thriving. For years, I'd been the invisible hand that smoothed the wrinkles under that caption, the one who paid for the lighting, the catering, the quiet upkeep of the illusion. My sister Jill, tall, practiced smile, a mane of hair that caught the light like it was made to be photographed, loved those moments. She thrived in them. Tonight she stood at the head of the table with a glass raised, the kind of speech she'd practiced between staged content shoots. Some people, she said, voice lilting with mock concern, just try too hard to matter. Her eyes landed on me the way a camera lens lands, precise, flattering to a fault. A silence washed over the table like cold water. For a heartbeat, I was a ghost seated among my own people. My father, whose jokes used to land and now sounded smaller. My mother, with the faint perfume of apology she wore whenever money came up. Uncle Edward, with his set jaw. Grandma watching like she kept time with everything. I remembered the early years, the small transfers, the just this once promise, the way my bank account receded like a tide. I remembered being proud in my quiet way. I was responsible, steady, the one who could be counted on. But pride curdles when it's always one-sided. Jill laughed too loud, the sort of noise that asked for applause even when none came. 25,000 well spent, she crowed, tapping her phone like she owned the moment. You should have seen the pre-party shoot. Her husband, Daniel, chuckled as if the money came from some inexhaustible fountain. And there I was, the fundraiser for this perfect little act, a woman who budgeted down to the dollar and drove a 10-year-old Honda while funding someone else's fantasy. I listened, and the room blurred at the edges. I could hear my heart, steady and exhausted. I thought of the late nights balancing ledgers, the dinners I skipped, the vacations I postponed so that someone else could have props and glossy backdrops. I thought of my mother's soft voice on the phone. You can afford it, dear. You're so good with money. Words meant to soothe but sharpened into an instruction. My father had always been blunter, like a man carrying a ledger of his own pride. They had taught me to put others first and called it virtue. But virtue is ugly when it becomes a duty that costs you. As Jill clicked selfies, the room full of cousins and aunts and children played their parts. Polite smiles, forced clapping, the kind of attention that curdled into entitlement when no one ever asked the cost. My uncle told a war story and the kids chased each other under the tables. Grandma watched them all with that unreadable look she wore like a shawl. Aunt Cynthia sipped her drink by the edge of the room, eyes narrower than usual, like someone counting not applause, but debts. I made a note of that look. Small things like that lodge in the chest and refuse to leave. When Jill raised her glass for the customary self-congratulatory toast, the world felt thin, like paper. I had rehearsed nothing, planned nothing dramatic. I had learned the economy of small, decisive choices. While everyone thought I'd stepped away from the table to check a message, I opened my banking app. My hands were steady, despite the heat in my face. The transfer for the party, the automatic payment I'd set up weeks ago so no one had to think about the mechanics of how things stayed pretty, stared back at me like a question that had gone unanswered for too long. I tapped. It felt like closing a switch. A faint vibration, a tiny electric punctuation point, ran through the table. Jill's phone buzzed in her hand. Curiosity made her look down. Her expression changed faster than a shudder. Curiosity to confusion to a colorless shock. The chatter around us stuttered and fell away. My father leaned toward me, whispering with a mixture of incredulity and accusation. What did you just do, Marina? He had never called me Marina in an accusing tone before. His voice cracked along the edges of something older than money. I smiled, because for once I could afford the small cruelty of being calm. I'm done, I said, loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. The words landed like a stone in still water. They had the sound of a verdict. Faces that had expected me to be the comic relief, the silent benefactor, froze. Jill's mouth parted, searching for sarcasm or manipulation to swing back with. None came. Her husband took a breath like a man who sold more smiles than sense and barked at me, the entitlement in his voice a raw wound. You can't just do that, Marina. This is a family event. Family. The word cashed like an excuse. I had learned to recognize that tone, the way it absolved and trained at once. My uncle, Edward, the one who'd called balls and strikes his whole life, stood up with an authority that hushed the room. He said things now that would have been scandalous 2 hours ago, that I'd been carrying too much and that maybe it was time for them to carry a bit themselves. Grandma, who'd been a quiet lighthouse all night, met my eyes and said, almost sotto voce, "It's about time someone said it." Her words were a small war cry, a quiet solidarity that felt like armor. They tried to shame me, of course. My father's jaw tightened. My mother made the small, practiced coup that had guilt folded into every syllable. Think of Jill. Her pleading had always been my leash. The table filled with the static of hurt feelings of a family that preferred the performance of unity over the messy accounting of true care. I tried to remember the last time they'd asked how I was, not how much I could give. When the chorus of indignation swelled, I picked up my purse. My hands trembled just enough to be real, not theatrical. "You've got this," I told Jill, and the words were softer than I expected. They were not triumph. They were a last, sweet act of release. I slid past folding chairs and stuttering apologies and out into the air that smelled like smoke and pine. The barn doors closed behind me with the faint click that sounded to my ears like a bank vault shutting. Outside, the cold hit my face with a truth that was almost a relief. For years, the family's problems had been a debt to me, emotional, financial, an obligation disguised as love. I thought walking out would be a single decisive moment, a strike that severed something simple and clean. I didn't know then, couldn't have known, that this was the first small fissure in something much larger. Aunt Cynthia and Grandma, the two quiet witnesses, would not let this slide like a forgotten bill. Their eyes had been watching more than my sister's grandstanding tonight. They had been taking notes. I sat in my car with my hands folded in my lap and let the engine idle. My chest hurt in a way that was almost bright. For the first time in years, I had done something that was only for me. I hadn't screamed or accused. I'd simply flipped a switch and watched the light go out. There was a soft, dangerous satisfaction in that simplicity, but the night hummed with an aftertaste, like something that had been hidden beneath the boards of the house for years was loosening, about to be discovered. When I locked the door of the car, I felt them watching from the window. My family, a tableau beside the humming string lights, talking in low, furious voices that meant their world had tilted. I drove away with the last of the music in the barn trailing behind me, the image of Aunt Cynthia's face like an ember in my mind. I didn't look back. I thought I was walking toward solitude. I was walking toward truths that had been waiting, patient as dust. After the party, the silence from my family felt loud. A week went by. No calls, no texts, just passive-aggressive Instagram stories from my sister. A photo of her coffee mug captioned, "Some people thrive on drama." I almost laughed. I'd funded that coffee mug. But if you really want to understand how we got here, how I became their unpaid accountant, their safety net, their quiet scapegoat, you need to know where it started. It began with my mother's voice on the phone, the year I landed my first steady job as a CPA. I remember that night clearly. I was still unpacking boxes in my tiny apartment. The air smelled like cardboard and takeout noodles. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you've always been so good with money. Your father and I are just a little tight this month. You know how these things go." Of course I sent her the money, $600. It felt good. I thought I was helping. Then came the one-time help for my sister's car payment, then a loan for her photography equipment when she decided to go full content creator. Then the down payment for her new apartment when she and Daniel got engaged, because it's an investment in her future. Every time my mother would reassure me, "You're just better with these things than the rest of us." I told myself that was love, but it wasn't. It was management, emotional accounting disguised as affection. Before long, the family's finances ran through me like veins through a body. Bills, repairs, taxes. Even my parents' life insurance payments came from an account I managed. I didn't mind at first. There's comfort in control. There's power in competence. But power without appreciation corrodes into servitude, and that's what I became, their quiet servant, with a smile. I remember one night, about a year ago, when I tried to draw a line. It was past midnight. I was finishing up a client's audit when my phone buzzed. It was my mother, again. Her text was simple. Can you send $2,000 by tomorrow morning? Dad's card got declined at the store. I called her immediately. Mom, you know I love helping, but I can't keep doing this every month. There was silence on the other end, then a trembling sigh. Oh, Marina, you've changed. Money's made you cold. That sentence hit me like a slap. Cold. Because I finally said no. I wired the money anyway. I told myself I was keeping the peace. But that night, I stared at my ceiling for hours, feeling something twist in my chest, something that would later grow into fury. The irony is my sister's success, the followers, the brand deals, the curated happiness, was built on my quiet bookkeeping. I even filed her taxes. She called it sister support. Support, yes, like scaffolding that never gets photographed in the finished building. When her engagement went viral, my parents hosted a family dinner that felt more like a press event. I remember the photographer, yes, she'd hired one, asking us to look proud. My father had his arm around her shoulder. My mother's smile gleamed like a shellac. And me? I stood behind them, out of frame, the invisible investor. Later that night, I found my father smoking in the driveway, something he only did when he was cornered by his own guilt. You know, kid, he said, family isn't about keeping score. I wanted to tell him I'd stopped keeping score years ago, but the truth, I hadn't. I just stopped collecting. By the time the party came around this year, my savings had thinned to almost nothing. I'd paid off their medical bills, their mortgage arrears, my sister's credit card debt, all of it justified by, "You're more stable, dear." Stable. A polite synonym for expendable. That's why I didn't flinch when I canceled that payment during the party. It wasn't a rebellion. It was an overdue correction. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was wrong. Something bigger than my sister's entitlement or my parents' manipulation. It started with an odd memory, a conversation I'd overheard years ago between my mother and Aunt Cynthia, half whispered behind a closed door. Don't tell Marina about the sale, my mother had said. It's better if she doesn't know. At the time, I'd assumed it was about some old furniture or a piece of land they'd sold off. But lately, the memory had been replaying in my mind, sharper each time. The tone hadn't been casual. It had been cautious. 2 weeks after the party, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar text. Aunt Cynthia, we need to talk, alone. Don't tell your parents. I stared at the message for a long time. Cynthia wasn't dramatic. She was the kind of woman who spoke in careful, measured syllables, never more than necessary. If she said something was wrong, it meant something was wrong. I agreed to meet her that weekend. That night, I went through my spreadsheets, my bank records, my parents' statements, all the numbers I'd been too loyal to question. And there it was. A wire transfer I'd never noticed before, 6 figures, withdrawn from my parents' joint account about 3 years ago. The note said, condo sale, final. I didn't remember any condo sale, and I certainly hadn't seen a cent of that money. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, cold and trembling. For the first time in years, the numbers didn't make sense. And that terrified me, because in my world, numbers are truth. But this time, the truth was about to hurt. Aunt Cynthia's apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books, the kind of scent that made you feel like you were about to hear something serious. She didn't waste time with small talk. Her hands rested on the coffee table, fingers laced, eyes sharp, steady, the kind of gaze that made you feel like she could see every hidden transaction, every secret ledger I'd kept buried in my spreadsheets. Marina, she began, voice low and steady, there's something you need to know about your parents, about the money. I froze mid-sip, the coffee bitter in my mouth. I could feel the air tighten, like a wire being drawn taut. They sold the old family condo downtown, she said, almost whispering the words as if they were fragile. A year ago. They got $100,000. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. $100,000. My parents had never mentioned it. They'd acted like money was always tight, always barely enough. And yet here was a sum big enough to cover every one of my sister's luxuries and still leave a cushion for themselves. They didn't tell me, I said. my voice barely audible. My mind raced. Every late-night call, every transfer, every canceled vacation, it had all been unnecessary. They didn't tell you because they didn't want you interfering, Aunt Cynthia continued. They thought they could keep you covering for Jill and, well, for themselves too. They invested it in some real estate stock. Thought they'd triple it, but it tanked. Almost all gone now. I could feel my chest tighten. I'd been working overtime, sacrificing my own savings, shuttling money to everyone else, and they'd been sitting on a six-figure cushion, hiding it from me. And that's not all. Aunt Cynthia leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. You've been paying their health insurance premiums for 6 months. The roof repairs last spring, that was your money too. They let you carry all of this while pretending they couldn't. It wasn't just favoring Jill. They were using you. The betrayal rolled over me, a wave I had no choice but to ride. I remembered every, "You're good with money, Marina," comment. Every time they'd asked me to transfer funds with a "we're counting on you" look. Every smile that I now understood as manipulative. They played me, I muttered, more to myself than to her. My hands were trembling, fingers tracing the rim of my coffee mug. All of them. Every last one. Every. Aunt Cynthia's face softened, just a fraction. I thought you deserved to know. After the party, I couldn't stay silent. The thought of the fall festival party came rushing back. Jill's smug smile, the sound of her phone buzzing mid-toast, the quiet satisfaction in Uncle Edward's voice when he finally called it like it was. That moment wasn't just a rebellion. It was a spark of something much bigger, something that would ignite everything I thought I knew about my family. I pulled out my phone before I even realized what I was doing. The automatic transfers, the recurring payments, every single account I had set up for them, all canceled, one by one. Insurance, bills, credit cards, rent, all of it. Done. Then I sent a single group text to my parents and sister. I'm done paying for any of you. You're on your own. My phone lit up almost immediately. Jill's message glowed on the screen. Marina, what's wrong with you? You can't do this. Fix it now. Her desperation jumped off the screen. She still thought she could control me, snap her fingers, and I'd bail her out like always. I didn't respond. Aunt Cynthia watched me, her expression unreadable but calm. You're stronger than they give you credit for, she said. I didn't feel strong. I felt betrayed, raw, unfiltered, the kind of betrayal that leaves a hollow ache in your chest. But I also felt a spark of something new, resolve. For years, I had been the invisible accountant, the family's safety net. That ended today. The drive home was quiet. The streets of Boise passed under me in a blur. My mind kept circling the $100,000. My parents could have eased the burden on me, could have helped Jill without putting me in financial chains. Instead, they hid it, gambled it away, and let me carry the weight. And Jill? She was complicit, taking, always taking, never questioning. For the first time, I felt the intoxicating mixture of anger and freedom. This wasn't just about the money. This was about reclaiming my life, my choices, my voice. I was done being the invisible one. I was done being used. And what came next was going to make them realize exactly what that meant. The days after I cut off my family felt surreal, like watching a slow-motion collapse from a safe distance. Jill didn't take it well. I heard through cousins that the ranch event planner was calling her nonstop, threatening legal action over the $10,000 fall festival bill. She had assumed I'd cover it, like always. She hadn't. And now she had to scramble. Her designer bags, her custom furniture, even the golf clubs Daniel used to flaunt. They started disappearing, sold off in a flurry. The Instagram perfect apartment she once posted about? Gone. They moved to a cramped one-bedroom on the edge of town, where the walls were too thin and the rent was just enough to survive. I won't lie, a part of me felt vindicated. Watching them struggle wasn't cruel. It was the natural consequence of years of dependency and deceit. But another part of me felt guilty. Guilty for the silent satisfaction I felt as they scrambled. Guilty because family, even when toxic, still tugs at your heart. Jill found work at a downtown coffee shop, minimum wage, steaming milk, ringing up orders. She tried to keep her influencer persona alive, posting filtered shots of herself holding a latte with captions like, "Hustle never stops." But the facade was thin. Her desperation leaked through. Her followers noticed fewer posts, fewer smiles. Daniel was gone, taking a job in Spokane after they fought over money and pride. Meanwhile, my parents were stumbling through reality. The $100,000 condo sale they had hidden was gone. Their investments tanked, and without me covering their insurance and repairs, bills piled up fast. My father sold his beloved pickup truck. My mother started clipping coupons, and both started showing cracks in the armor I'd always assumed was unshakable. They left messages I didn't answer. My father pleaded for understanding. My mother tried soft guilt, but I wasn't going to fix them this time. Their choices, like Jill's, were their consequences. At work, life felt different. I threw myself into clients' accounts, side projects, even a small consulting venture helping local businesses manage their taxes. Every dollar I saved felt like a brick building a new life, one that belonged solely to me. For the first time, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder to see if anyone needed me to bail them out. Uncle Edward called one evening. His gruff voice held warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "You did the right thing, kid. They needed a wake-up call." I smiled, a real one, the kind I hadn't felt in months. "Thanks," I said. "I just couldn't do it anymore." He chuckled. "Good. You're better than they deserve." Even as I rebuilt my life, Jill kept trying. Text after text. "Please, one last time. Rent, utilities. I'm working now. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't respond. She wasn't my responsibility. Not anymore. My parents tried a softer approach later. Long, guilt-laden emails about family, how they were struggling, how I was turning my back. I read them but felt none of the old pull. They had spent years leaning on me. Now they were learning to stand without me. I started to notice subtle changes in the family network. Cousins whispered, wondering if Jill would ever recover. Aunt Cynthia texted sporadically, quietly proud. Grandma, usually silent, sent me a single message. "You did what no one else could. I'm proud of you." I realized that for all the chaos, there were allies who saw me, not as the family's bank, not as the reliable Marina who never complained, but as a person who finally chose herself. 3 months in, Jill's Instagram was a shadow of its former self. She clung to old images, captions recycled, the aura of perfection crumbling. Daniel was long gone. My parents were scraping by, working jobs they'd scoffed at before. And me, I was thriving. I could go to sleep without dread, wake up without anxiety, spend money I had earned without guilt. I could walk down the street and not see every shadow as a potential crisis to solve. And yet, deep down, I knew the hardest part wasn't just cutting them off. It was holding onto my boundaries while watching them struggle. I felt the thrill of autonomy and the sting of guilt simultaneously. It was messy. It was complicated. It was mine. But as I pored over my own finances, planning a small weekend trip, I knew something else was brewing. Jill wasn't finished. My parents weren't finished. Family drama has a way of circling back when you least expect it. And I was ready. By the time the 5th week rolled around, the consequences of my decision were no longer whispers or private struggles. They were spilling into public view. Jill, desperate to maintain her image, had overextended herself on Instagram once again. A live video she'd intended as a day in the life update went catastrophically wrong. Halfway through, her phone battery died midstream, the Wi-Fi cut out, and her followers flooded the comments with mocking remarks about her sudden fall from grace. I watched, a knot of conflicting emotions twisting in my stomach. It was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected, seeing someone who had relied on my labor, my savings, my patience, falter. But it was also oddly sorrowful. Jill's world, carefully curated for perfection, was crumbling. The facades she'd built were crashing down, exposing vulnerabilities she'd never wanted anyone to see. Her husband Daniel didn't help matters. He'd been bouncing between couches for weeks, arguing with her over money, loyalty, and pride. Rumor had it he'd started seeing someone new, a colleague from his Spokane dealership, and had made no secret of it. Their separation was messy, quiet in the world, but deafening to those who'd known them both. Meanwhile, my parents' own struggles grew more tangible. The local newspaper ran a small piece on a family in Boise, forced to sell possessions and downsize after a failed investment. I didn't have to read between the lines. I knew exactly who it was about. My father had taken on part-time deliveries at night. My mother was selling homemade crafts online. Their pride had been wounded, their comfort dismantled. I felt a strange combination of vindication and unease. They'd all learned the hard way, yes, but the fallout was more than financial. It was emotional. The tension in our extended family gatherings grew palpable. Cousins looked at me with a mix of admiration and wariness. Some whispered, some avoided eye contact entirely. At home, I focused on myself. I signed up for a weekend retreat in Seattle, reconnected with friends I'd neglected, and started small indulgences I'd never allowed myself before. A new desk, a cooking class, early morning runs through Boise's quiet streets. Every step felt like reclamation. But even as I rebuilt, the phone buzzed with texts from Jill. Desperate, pleading, sometimes accusatory. Marina, I can't believe you'd let me do this. We're family. Don't abandon me now. Please, just one more month. Rent, utilities, I'm working. I can pay you back. I ignored them all, not because I didn't care, but because the cycle had to break. I wasn't their lifeline anymore. They had to face reality. And then came the unexpected, a voicemail from Aunt Cynthia, her tone urgent. Marina, it's bigger than we thought. Call me as soon as you can. My pulse quickened. I didn't like that kind of uncertainty. Aunt Cynthia didn't raise alarms without reason. I called immediately. They're in trouble, she said without preamble. Not just struggling. There's an auditor involved, and it's turning into a mess that could affect more than just their finances. Your parents might lose part of their home if this isn't handled. And Jill, she's in real danger of being blacklisted from her partnerships. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering. Part of me wanted to stay distant. Part of me wanted to rush in and fix it. Old habits die hard. Aunt Cynthia's voice cut through my hesitation. It's your call, Marina, but if you get involved, it changes everything. Be prepared. And in that moment, I realized standing up for myself was only the beginning. Real drama, real moral choices were still ahead. Helping them now could mean losing everything I'd just fought to gain. Walking away could feel like cruelty. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift slightly, but the burden of decisions still pressing down. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. The week after Aunt Cynthia's call, I felt the tension of choice pressing down on me like the heat of a midsummer afternoon. Every text from Jill, every frantic voicemail from my parents seemed to echo in my skull, a chorus of dependency and guilt. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the spreadsheet of my own finances, coffee cooling beside me, and realized I had a decision to make. Help them, and risk losing the freedom I had clawed back with every canceled transfer and every hard boundary I'd set, or watch them fall entirely, letting the consequences of their choices play out without me. The rational part of me leaned toward the latter. They needed to feel the weight of their actions. But my heart, the one that had long been used as a family ATM, it ached at the thought of their suffering. Jill's messages became increasingly frantic. Marina, please, you don't understand. They'll take everything from us. Just this once, help me. I'm begging. The desperation was raw, almost palpable through the screen. I remembered the Instagram photos, the designer bags, the parties, and the way she had flaunted a life I had funded. Yet I also remembered the way she had flinched when the $10,000 notification hit, the shock and fear, the first crack in her perfectionist mask. I poured a cup of tea, hands trembling slightly, and stared at her last message. Was I willing to step back into the role of savior, knowing the cost? The parents' situation was worse. Without insurance coverage and with the failed investment, bills were piling up fast. Uncle Edward called again, voice low but concerned. Marina, he said, I know you don't owe them, but if you don't act soon, they might lose the house. You can do something without giving up yourself entirely. Just be strategic. I bit my lip, the old conflict rising. Strategy, not sacrifice. Could I save them without becoming invisible again? Could I intervene and maintain my boundaries? 2 nights later, Jill showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door to find her face pale, eyes rimmed with red from crying. Daniel's absence was evident in the slump of her shoulders. Marina, please, she whispered. I messed up. I know I did, but I can fix it. I can do better. I need you, just this once. I closed the door behind her and guided her to the couch, letting her sit, her hands twisting nervously. I felt a flicker of the old caretaker instinct, the one I'd buried beneath layers of anger and resolve. You've had years of help, Jill, I said, voice calm but firm. I'm not your ATM anymore. You can't just keep leaning on me every time things get hard. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know. I'm sorry. I see it now. I see what I've done to you. To all of you. The weight of truth in her voice hit me. For the first time, Jill seemed small, vulnerable, human. Not the golden child, not the influencer, just someone who had been reckless and dependent. I sat back, considering my options. I could help, selectively, strategically, setting rules she and my parents had to follow. Or I could let the consequences fully teach them the lessons I'd been trying to impart for years. I realized the path forward wasn't binary. I could hold them accountable, enforce boundaries, and still be human. The problem wasn't whether to help or not, it was how. I'll help, I said finally, watching her flinch at the words, but on my terms. You follow the rules, you face the consequences, and you do it without me bailing you out like before. Her relief was immediate, almost tangible, but in that moment I knew something else was at stake. Trust. Between me and Jill, and me and my parents. Every decision from here on would test the fragile balance between compassion and self-preservation. The storm wasn't over, it was just evolving. By the time I made the decision to intervene strategically, the weight of months of tension had sharpened my instincts. I wasn't stepping back into old patterns. I wasn't the invisible ATM. I was a negotiator, a boundary setter, and for the first time, I felt fully in control of my role in this family drama. I called Jill first. Her voice trembled over the phone. Marina, I don't want to mess this up again. I promise I'll follow your rules. Good, I said. No more secrets, no more excuses. You pay what you owe and you take responsibility. I'll help coordinate the rest of the fallout, but you handle your own choices moving forward. Over the next week, I became a sort of overseer, arranging payments for immediate crises, the ranch party debt, utility bills, and critical repairs for my parents' home, while insisting they contribute in ways they hadn't before. Jill started taking shifts at the coffee shop seriously, saving a portion of her wages toward the debts she had incurred. My parents downsized further and began budgeting rigorously. Pride and stubbornness still lingered, but they were learning a version of self-reliance for the first time. Family gatherings became tense, but quieter. Uncle Edward gave me a subtle nod of approval. Grandma smiled knowingly from across the room. Aunt Cynthia, ever the observer, whispered, You did it right. You didn't abandon them, but you didn't let them walk over you either. I watched Jill and my parents struggle, stumble, and sometimes fail, but I also saw them learning. There was no perfection, no instant redemption, just growth, discomfort, and accountability. Exactly the lessons I had hoped they'd grasp. Months passed. Jill's Instagram faded into a quieter, more authentic presence. She posted occasionally, not flaunting wealth or perfection, but sharing small wins. A latte she made herself, a sincere apology to followers about overextending, glimpses of her coffee shop life. Daniel remained out of the picture, leaving her to navigate adulthood alone. She was learning responsibility the hard way. My parents, too, adapted. My dad kept his delivery job. My mom built a modest online craft business. And for the first time, they weren't relying on me to solve everything. Their pride remained, but it was tempered by a newfound humility. And me? I thrived. My savings recovered, my career progressed, and my weekends became mine to spend as I pleased. Reading, traveling, running, cooking. I realized something profound. Boundaries were not walls. They were bridges. By enforcing them, I had rebuilt trust without sacrificing myself. I had chosen compassion without surrendering control. Aunt Cynthia visited one Sunday afternoon. She sat on my new sofa, sipping tea. You did something remarkable, Marina. You didn't just save them, you saved yourself too. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. I finally understand, I said. Family isn't about sacrifice at the expense of yourself. It's about balance, it's about honesty, and sometimes tough love. She nodded. Exactly. And you've earned your life back. The hardest part of the journey, the years of being taken for granted, the betrayal of hidden truths, the endless cycle of giving, had forged me into someone stronger, more perceptive, more grounded. I was still family, still loved them in my way, but I was no longer defined by their needs or their expectations. The storm had passed, but the lessons lingered. And though there would always be future conflicts, misunderstandings, and moments of tension, I had learned to navigate them without losing myself. For the first time in decades, I felt free, and it was exhilarating.